So three, please join me for a salute to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I would entertain a motion to suspend the rules.
Second.
Thank you. Motion is in order. This is a voice vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. We're now operating under suspended rules. The reason for the public hearing this evening is to first, we will be addressing 4 public hearings, but prior to the public hearings, we are joined by Courtney Allen. I was just looking for you, and you're in the front row, so it's been one of those days. But Courtney's going to talk to us a little bit about some of the concerns that we have as it relates to the water supply and the drought. So please.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. I'm just going to give a brief run-through, basically on where we are, how we got here, what we've done so far, and what we're working on now. So where we are now, I was down here the beginning of the month with what I thought was good news, lots of rain in the forecast, running into rainy season, and it hasn't rained since. So all that predicted rain is going to the north and the south, or just dissipating before it makes it to Attleboro, unfortunately. That's after near historic rain through May. And as I said last time I was here, the only month since May that we've had that was near average was August. The rest are low. So our year to date through October, we're missing about a foot of rain compared to average over the last couple of years. Actually, over the last 10 years. Basically, about 8 of those inches are between September and October. These are our rainy months, and we've gotten a little over 2 inches compared to a normal of about 10 and a half. Manchester is currently 135 feet over sea level. This is the lowest we've had it since the aqueduct was put in service back in 2009. It's our 8th lowest on record. The records go back to 1962 for that reservoir. It was built as part of the 95 interstate going through. The reason I'm here, I mean, we're not running out of water next week. We're not running out of water by Christmas, but we need to take steps now to make sure that we don't. So what we've done so far, we went to full outdoor restrictions on July 22nd. And this was basically just to essential use, and people could still water vegetable gardens if it was essential to, planned maintenance of the house, that sort of thing. This reduced our consumption to near winter numbers in August and September. Our winter production's usually about 3.5 million gallons a day. August and September will be between 3.6 and 3.7 million gallons a day. Our October daily average so far is about 3 million gallons a day. So the restrictions, even though we're still chasing people that like to violate the restrictions, they are working. But it's helping the reservoir not get worse, but it's not helping us replenish. So last week, we sent out by web alerts, and we are reaching out to our local large businesses and large water users to encourage conservation of indoor use. Things like shorter showers, shutting off the water when shaving, things like that. So that's one reason why October is so low for production, and this is the first time in my near 20 years with the department that we've gone into what we're considering a level 4 restriction. We've never been grasping at people conserving indoors before. The other thing that we've done so far, we did start Wading River in August and September to take some strain off the reservoir system that feeds West Street. It was later shut down for elevated manganese. While it was online, it produced about 43 million gallons, which is, at current production, about 11 or 12 days of water that would have come from the reservoir system for West Street. So that's kind of where we are now. What we're working on right now is preparing Wading River for startup. It is ready to go. It's bacteria tested. Excuse me. We're giving time to get notices out. There's flyers out to our public-facing departments, because there's really not time at this point to do a mailer. We're hitting social media. I'm meeting with Channel 10 tomorrow. It's gone out to Sun Chronicle and WARA. And actually, I heard from Channel 12 earlier today, too. We're hoping for 2 million gallons a day out of that plant if the reservoir system holds up, and that will be until temporary PFAS is in place in January to very early February, at which point we will have to cut production to 1 million gallons a day in order for the PFAS treatment to be effective. The other issue with Wading River, again, the manganese is looking good now. We've done some testing on the wells. That does not mean that will hold up with the plant actually operational and running into the system. But at this point, it's more important to have the water and preserve Manchester and actually use Wading River, because right now, again, there is plenty of water up there. We're the biggest user in that area of that watershed, so we will see levels come down there too when we start using it. We're working on expediting startup of the Pawtucket interconnection. The last major pieces are the SCADA integration, which is our signal, so we can see and control the plant from West Street, and so that Pawtucket can see the plant from their plant. After that is done, we will have a final inspection and basically a startup testing, final inspection by Pawtucket Water Supply and DEP. At that point, there's some sampling we need to do before it can come online. All that's going to be expedited through the lab. So we're hopeful for a couple weeks out, mid-November to maybe Thanksgiving, and that's where we're pushing everything we can. The station's basically, the electrical's all in, everything's ready to run. These are the last pieces. Startup of that will also cause discoloration in the system. It's going to be more affected in South Attleboro. And this gets back to when we started Wading River, we had water going one direction 2 years, and then we reversed flow. When we're in South Attleboro, those areas, that water's been going the same direction since these houses went up. Some of them are dating back to early 1900s, so it's going to be a little bit of a mess. We will get crews out to flush and clear it as quickly as possible. DEP, I've been in contact with them. They're ready to inspect as soon as we're ready. They're also, again, one of those last pieces is being able to see and view the plant. We're going to get the Pawtucket side done first. And if we're still waiting for our SCADA signal, DEP is okay if we actually man the plant while it's operational. So this will bring our off shifts from 2 plant operators to 3 until our signal is able to be brought in. I'm hopeful it's ready and that we don't have to do that, but we're ready just in case, worst case scenario. The cost of the water purchasing from Pawtucket is about $35,000 a week. There was $35,000 put in the budget because, again, expecting this to be online, we do have to put it to the system to make sure it works once a year. We didn't expect to have to run it on a permanent basis. It's not something you can plan for. The chemical costs, they're negligible, and the electric cost, we should be able to absorb it by the budget because West Street won't be running as often. Basically, the plan is to use those 2 sources, the Pawtucket Station and Wading River, to basically try to meet all to most of the production so that West Street can just run periodically to make up the difference. Again, that's how we're going to get our reservoir system to recoup with the lack of rain. The other things that we're looking at is we have 3 other interconnected departments. One of them is North Attleboro. North Attleboro is having their own water issues and they cannot sell. Seekonk is hopeful. We met out on site with them yesterday. They're agreeable to selling. They estimated about 200,000 gallons a day, which doesn't sound like much, but every little bit might help. And we're pricing pumps for a hydrant connection there. I also spoke with Norton, who could give a little bit less. They would be a last resort. They do have compliance issues, and the volume that they may be able to provide is only around 100,000 gallons a day. I also spoke with Mansfield. We are not interconnected with Mansfield. However, they are open to a hydrant-to-hydrant connection for 200,000 to 300,000 gallons a day if needed. And again, this would be dependent on how many connections we use or need to use. It's going to be a full pump setup at each one, and also at the current water rate is set by those towns. The other thing that we're looking at is we're working with Mass DEP on bringing one or both of the old wells out in the front of the West Street plant back online as an emergency or future permanent sources for the plant. The sampling, just initial sampling, went into the well, dipped and did some internal testing, actually looked pretty good. DEP is requesting a 48-hour pump test. These wells were decommissioned in the mid-90s, so none of the equipment's there. So we have to get an electrical installation out there and start pump testing them, and again, the same sampling that we would see before we bring Pawtucket back online. There's a potential there for about 175 gallons a minute anytime West Street is operational. So if West Street's running for 24 hours, we would get about 250,000 gallons out of those wells. We're still pricing bottled or trucked water if needed, but at this time, the West Street fill station is still open for anyone that needs it. And what we're going to be working on in the future, and one of these items has actually been in the capital projects for capital improvement plan for a couple of years, is we're finishing up a dredging assessment for Orrs Pond, Blake's Pond, and Hoppin Hill reservoirs. It's almost done. Orrs Pond, we're basically waiting on one sample. The consultants cannot get a boat out there right now, and they can't make it into the area that needs to be tested because it's all mud. So it's waiting on that. And we're hoping, I actually have this in the capital plan, the actual engineering and permitting for the dredging of these 3 reservoirs for FY26. The cost on the engineering, permitting, and construction oversight is $880,000, and construction estimate for those 3 reservoirs is $6.3 million. It will improve volume, it'll improve quality at all 3 reservoirs, and it will also extend our summer use and the life that we get out of Orrs Pond each year, which will give us some more resiliency in the reservoir system. I've started looking at potential for Manchester dredging. This is an enormous project compared to the other 3. We don't have as much information on that reservoir as we do on the other 3. There's a lot of ledge, there's potential blasting, there's potential not being able to use the reservoir while we're doing this. Estimated cost for that is about $11 million. So you're looking at almost double of what it would cost to do the entire other 3. We're looking for potential other water sources out in the system, trying to be creative. None of these are going to be quick, none of them are going to help us right now. Sweden Swamp's been mentioned. I haven't looked into it much, but we're starting. The other source that we have that we're going to be looking at is we have an abandoned well site out on Holden Street. That would pull basically under the influence of the Bungay River. Those wells were taken offline in the mid-1980s due to high manganese. There's not any way to get that well water to either one of our plants because you're looking at miles away from either one of them. So in order to bring Holden Street into the system, you're looking at treatment for at least manganese. And again, they were pulled down in the mid-1980s before we knew PFAS existed. So we could be looking at something like that too. Ballpark cost on those, if I had to guess, depending on production, you're looking at the scale of what's at Wading River that's gonna be going in. So that's basically what we have now. I'm here to answer any questions.
Yeah, so before we get to questions, first of all, thank you, and your entire water department. This is, probably pretty unimaginable. I know we're out in this similar situation, similar discussion, August of '22. I think it's important that we thank the residents that have been following this going forward and recognize the strife and the challenge this has been for them. Courtney, can you, with all this going on, some of the questions I've received from residents have been, are we gonna expect a rate hike? How's all this gonna impact us? So with all this construction that I think hopefully we don't need it, right? Hopefully Mother Nature just stops being mad at us for whatever reason and just, gives us some rainstorms. But in the interest, what's the impact it's gonna have on the ratepayer especially?
That might be more a question from Mason, and Mason is here.
Sure, thank you.
Yes, thank you. It's not great news, just to be fully transparent, right? So a lot of the costs related to water production and the water department are fixed costs. To give an idea, Courtney just mentioned that the Pawtucket Interconnect, to run that system at their current rates, is about $35,000 a week, a little over $5,000 a day. Based on the current water levels, I think we've kind of said it could be on indefinitely at this point. So if you're looking at the rest of the fiscal year, that's about 32 weeks from mid-November. At $35,000 a week, that's a little over 1.1 million. We talked last week about retained earnings, right? The retained earnings number was just under 1.3. That's sort of your entire balance of your retained earnings. So unless there's other expenses to cut, other revenue sources, that's essentially we have to cover the costs with available cash for the Water Enterprise Fund. So the reality is if this becomes something that we have to bear onto the budget going forward, it's going to result in rate increases. Additional costs naturally are going to result in necessary rate increases. I just think that's kind of obvious in that if the costs are going up, we ultimately have to account for those costs. And the challenge is again, the revenue structure is a usage structure. So at the same time, we're necessarily asking for folks to cut usage, but the reality is we're also in the same way we're cutting our revenue. So the reality is it's a challenge. So we're looking right now as sort of a stopgap measure to consider potential other funding sources to try to mitigate the cost on the enterprise fund, at least in this fiscal year, to hopefully get us through the end of the fiscal year. So in some initial conversations with the city auditor in the last couple of days about how can we sort of leverage some remaining ARPA funds to potentially, kind of similar to what was done with the zoo revolving fund, is sort of a potential inflow of those ARPA funds to kind of mitigate the cost for the enterprise. That would definitely provide us some stopgap and mitigate the need to kind of dip into those cash reserves as much, but it's very likely that with the revenue cuts and the additional expenses we're going to incur, that that retained earnings is going to be depleted this year. So that is a reality we face. We know that we're also trying to build cash reserves for I would say a rainy day, but in this case it's sort of the opposite. So ironically, we talk about the general fund, we say rainy day. Here it's more of the dry day. So I think that we have a more robust rate structure just from what we did last year to kind of mitigate the impact of those dry years. But this is definitely, this is an emergency situation. It requires an emergency declaration to turn on the Pawtucket Interconnect. This is, we believe, truly an emergency situation, hopefully not recurring going forward. But, the reality is even 6 months of that is sort of depletes the cash for the enterprise. So.
Very good. Thank you. Questions? Mr. Waterman.
Thank you. I learned today at our planning department that we're considered not to be in a drought by the state.
As of so far. I had a Massachusetts Waterworks Superintendent Roundtable today, and Mass Waterworks is, they're basically our liaison with the state, and they don't see it being declared in the southeast region. That could change. They typically meet the first week of the month, which would be next week. Mm-hmm. But as of so far, they're saying no.
And if we were considered a drought, follow-up, what sort of ways would the state possibly help?
That's a good question. We haven't actually seen anything like this. Massachusetts isn't typically a state that sees droughts like this. I mean, we saw 22, and it blows my mind that they haven't declared one now because it's so much worse. But, I can look into it, but I haven't seen anything on assistance for funding yet.
Thank you.
One second. So just building off of Mr. Waterman's question, my understanding is that it's regional, so it's not municipality by municipality. When they say there's a drought being declared, it's on the region, and as you alluded to earlier, there's some other pockets that might be getting more rain than we are, which could be negatively impacting us.
Correct. Our region, for the drought regions, they can be set up by river basin if there's enough people pulling off of it, or by actual geographic location. Our region is the southeast region of the state minus the Cape and Islands. They're on their own region. And what we're seeing is, everything's going a little bit north of us, everything's going a little bit south of us. When the state drought team meets, there's things that they look at. One of them is stream flows, which, they don't look healthy anywhere around here. They really don't. They look at groundwater, and believe it or not, our surrounding groundwater systems is still fine, and that is one of the big things they look at. So I don't know if that's the reason for the not declared drought. The other thing they look at is fire risk, which it's unfortunate that we're starting to see brush fires and wildfires, and we're seeing them out as far out as Connecticut at this point. But that makes me a little bit hopeful that they may declare something and maybe start, helping us out with the money a little bit.
Thank you, Vice President Dolan.
Thanks. As far as the dredging, when you talked about the three sources, that it would be 880K plus 6.3 million, is there any benefit to maybe dredging two of the three? Do we have to do three at once? Are we saving money by doing three at once?
You would save some cost you would save cost in engineering and design and permitting for sure, because you're gonna have the same team doing all three without three separate contracts. You would save potentially some money on the actual construction. And this would depend where the contractor actually came from. You might possibly save some money on mobilization, potentially not because there's three different sites. I have been asked before, if I had to ditch two of those reservoirs and choose one to do, I would do oars, and I would do oars every single time. I would actually do oars before Manchester. We know there's water quality problems. Those of us that have lived here a long time or grew up here, the pond doesn't look like it used to. There's a lot of it. It gets a lot of runoff. It gets, everything that's dropped on the roads in that area of the city comes to ours, so we're starting to see it fill in. We have a lot of aquatic life from the runoff, and it would take care of all that. And again, a lot of our limit here is that the aqueduct down from Manchester, when we're using it, we cannot refill Manchester. We can't use Orr's Pond in the summer completely because of the water quality issues. So the dredging would give the volume. It would get basically healthier water out of the reservoir. So, the aqueduct's usually in use typical year, I would say mid to early June. And we use it until around this time of year, and that whole time we can't refill Manchester, and we can't use Orr's. So the dredging, if we could take that June date, get it into July, and get that October a little bit earlier, that's a huge amount of water, because when it rains, Orr's Pond refills, Manchester doesn't. So yeah, to answer your question in short, we can definitely split them up. It would be some definite cost savings on the engineering. I'm not sure how much on the contractor, though.
Can I just
Yeah.
follow? Are all of our water sources surface, or are any of them ground?
We are completely surface with a small amount of groundwater coming from the filter beds at Wading River.
Thank you.
Additional questions? Superintendent, thank you so much for coming down.
Thank
I
you.
wish you all the best over the next hopefully a couple weeks.
Hopefully a couple weeks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so now we'll actually get into the meeting agenda for this evening. I do appreciate Mason and Courtney coming down. Would you mind reading the notice for discussion?
Sure.
Thank you.
All right. So public hearings for special meeting October 29th, 2024. Joint public hearing relative to the proposed zoning amendments to the city's zoning ordinance regarding rapid transit commuter zoning, MGL 40A, Section 3A.
Thank you. Do we have any, this will be a joint public hearing with the planning board, so planning friends, welcome. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.
Do we have anyone to speak in favor? I already knew the answer to that. Gary, good evening.
Good evening. Good evening, Council President, members of the Municipal Council, Planning Board members, and members of the Planning Board. For the record, my name is Gary Erasian. I'm the City's Director of Planning and Development, and I am here tonight to speak in favor of the proposed NBTA Communities Overlay District zoning amendment. Before I begin, if I may just approach the Council and the Planning Board, I've got some handouts.
Yes.
Okay.
Gary, are we supposed to take all these paper clips off, or are these one, is this one packet?
It's one packet.
Okay.
And before I forget, also with me tonight, here is Judy Barrett of the Barrett Planning Group. She is our consultant on this project. She could not be here in person. She's away in Vermont, working on another planning project for a community in Vermont, but she is here remotely. Again, Judy Barrett. So I'm going to kind of take my time and walk the council through this presentation on the planning board. And just one other point before I forget. While Judy Barrett Planning Group is the city's planning consultant, I want to just apprise the municipal council and the planning board that once again we received a grant from the Massachusetts Housing Partnership for $25,000 to fund the consultant's fees on this. So it wasn't a city appropriation. We did get a grant for that. So I appeared before the municipal council this past April and brought you up to date to where the planning department is of the administration with this matter. I appeared before the council last year, and I know there was a number of questions. I think the product that we're going to propose tonight satisfies those concerns. I'd like to think that the council posed. So with that said, I just want to dive right into the presentation. In terms of background, just to refresh everybody's mind, part of my presentation for tonight, aside from the actual proposed ordinance and the overlay map, is some background on the overlay district, the MBTA Communities Overlay District. First is, what is the law? So let's get a foundation there. So on the first page of my handout, I have put down verbatim item A, which establishes the requirements of the law and why. I'm just going to briefly go over this. It has to be at least one district of reasonable size. And if you recall, when I originally spoke with the council on this, that size, that acreage, was 50 acres. This process started with the state probably well over 2 years ago, and there were lots of questions, not only from communities, lots of planners, lots of planning board members, lots of questions were flying back and forth. And then ultimately, that 50-acre requirement was reduced to not less than at least one 25-acre parcel of land had to be located within 1/2 mile of a commuter rail station. The other 25 acres could be distributed dispersed throughout the community in small acreages of 5, maybe 10 acres. So as we go through our proposal in a few minutes, I just want to let you know that it was one 50-acre piece of land within a half a mile of your commuter rail station. That's changed, aside from that requirement. It had to allow multifamily housing by right. It has to be multifamily housing without any age restrictions, and it had to be suitable for families with children. Paragraph 2 and paragraph 3. Why is multifamily zoning near transit and neighboring communities important? As stated by the state. Moreover, how does creating zoning for multifamily housing intended to help the crisis, that crisis being a shortage of houses, as articulated by the state? So I know time is of the essence tonight, and one of the reasons why I did this handout, which is a portion of my presentation, I thought the council and the planning board could read those without me necessarily reading those, if that's okay. It is what it is. The other element of the law is the question of what would happen if a municipality does not adopt the amendment to Mass General Law, Chapter 40A, Section 3A. Remember, there were about 177 communities that were identified. Attleboro is one of them. Some of the communities were identified as rapid transit. Attleboro was recognized as a commuter rail, and there were other categories that the other communities were put in. But regardless of what category you're in, there would be some penalties, and those penalties actually have to do with grants. And what I did is I took the opportunity to list these grants. Originally, it was the first 4 bullets on my handout. Eventually, over time, the state added several more. And the first ones is we just would not be eligible. It would be the Housing Choice Initiative, the Local Capital Projects Fund, the Mass Works Infrastructure Program, and the Housing Works Infrastructure Program. The second list, which is quite longer, says that the state would take into consideration the fact that if a community doesn't adopt the local ordinance, that these grants that I listed would be in jeopardy. What I also did is I highlighted those grants that at least my department and the Economic Development Director's Department office have filed for grant applications and received. Those are the Mass Works Infrastructure Program, the Community Planning Grants, Brownfield Redevelopment Fund, Site Readiness Program, Underutilized Properties Program, the Land Use Planning Grants, the Local Acquisitions for Natural Diversity Land Grants, and the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Grant. Now, I could go into these in great detail, but I won't. I will tell you that over time, the grants that I just listed under those that could be in jeopardy, that we've pulled in $6 to $7 million easily. One that I'm going to just go on a quick digression on to demonstrate the implications of the impact that these grants have on the city, and the implication being that if we're on the list that does not adopt this program, is the MaxWorks grant program. Circa 2016, we received a grant for $3.926 million, nearly $4 million grant. Within about 8 months thereafter, we received another one for the same project, and I'm going to tell you what the project is, for another $714,000. So for one project alone, the city received, through my department, $4.6 some odd million. And what did we do with that money? Without that fund, we would not currently have Riverfront Drive. We would not have Judith Robbins Park. We would not have the Kevin Walkway. We would not have Renaissance Station North. We would not have 1 Wall Street. and we would not have a TOD project that's on the cusp of execution. We would not have the new Public Works Highway Yard on Lamb Street. So I urge you to understand the implications of what these grants do for the city of Attleboro. Very briefly, we talked about the land grant that I mentioned also, LAND, that's an acronym. With those grant funds, we purchased the 86 acres of open space on Handy Street. We purchased the 54 acres of real estate on Wilmot Street. I believe we also purchased the real estate, at that time it could have been self-help and not land. This is another incarnation of the self-help grant program. The 110-acre conservation restriction that we purchased from the La Salette. Again, I could go on and on over history on the projects, but I just want to give you a little flavor of what those implications are. Having said that, I just want to go over some of the minimum background requirements of, again, the MBTA Communities Overlay District Ordinance. As I mentioned earlier, the city of Attleboro is designated as a commuter rail community. I mentioned that we need to have at least one piece of real estate, one parcel, that has at least 50 acres of contiguous acreage. That has changed. Now it's down to 25, provided that we also provide the other 25 acres elsewhere in the city. You're going to learn pretty soon that we've been able to accomplish that all in one parcel. Multifamily housing must be permitted as a matter of right. Again, there's no age restriction, and it shall be, it being the ordinance, suitable for families with children. The density has to be at least 15 acres, or 15 dwelling units per acre. And what's really important that I emphasize, and these are the next two bullets, are questions that the council posed back in April, and I want to reiterate and reemphasize my answers so they haven't changed. So my answers haven't changed, but today we're at the cusp of the ordinance, and I want to reemphasize these. The law does not require construction. So the units that we had discussed, when I think the number was 2,865, I know that kind of sent a shockwave. Please understand that the law nor the proposed ordinance in any way compels the construction. What the law requires is that there's evidence that the zoning ordinance that you adopt, or the zoning bylaw, provides the conduit, if you may, to be able to develop that. So our ordinance in no way replaces any other zoning tool in our zoning ordinance. It's an additional tool. And it does not in any way require the construction of any of the uses, any of the housing units. The other question was, what about infrastructure upgrades? And I explained then, and I'm going to explain it again to the council and to the planning board, that there is no requirement by the law that requires infrastructure upgrades. The concern was, well, first we have to build them, and then you're going to get stuck with the bill to build the infrastructure. And that's not the case. We don't have to build them, and we don't have to upgrade or spend any money on the infrastructure. It was my expectation tonight to read the 6 pages of the proposed ordinance. I thought I and Judy would be here tonight if there's any questions.
Gary, sorry to interrupt, but before we get to the ordinance piece, can I see if the planning board or the council has questions on?
So far?
Yeah.
Sure.
If you don't mind, just compartmentalize. Do we have any questions for, bless you, what we've talked about so far? Council Holmes.
Thank you. So, I just know that this is being litigated right now. Are you aware of that? That it's been.
Yes.
Okay, so has there been any conclusion with that yet?
Have there any what?
Any conclusion yet with that? Or-
Sure. So 75 communities have adopted, 75 are pending, as far as I know, my last figures. 16 communities have not passed it. I don't know if there's been any outcome. Judy, do you know if there's any information that you could share with the council on any of the outcomes of where we are with those communities that have not passed, or should I say denied, the adoption.
Or can you hear me?
Yes.
There are 83 communities at this point that have adopted MBTA community zoning. There are 15 that have not. In other words, they turned it down. There are several communities with town meetings coming up in November and early December. So they're all communities that have to comply, kind of like Attleboro, by December 31st. There is no resolution at this point of the Milton case, which I think is what you're referring to. The Supreme Judicial Court heard that case a couple of weeks ago. We are not expecting a decision from that before the end of the year. So communities that have not adopted their zoning by December 31st will nevertheless end up in a state of noncompliance. That has not changed.
Okay.
Additional questions? Okay. Gary, thank you.
Sure. So again, for purposes of brevity, it wasn't my intent to read over the 6 pages of the ordinance. I'd like to think everyone has read it. We can answer some questions. If not tonight, I also expect to come back at, if not another public hearing continued, or at least if it's closed tonight, that I would return to speak at a committee meeting. So again, if there are any questions, Judy and I are here tonight to answer any of those. So some of the highlights of the proposed ordinance. First of all, the proposed amendment is an overlay district. At the back of your package, I created a map. So when the municipal council votes to approve the ordinance, you would also be asked to approve this map, which would also become part of the city's zoning ordinance, much like, as you're well aware, with the city's water resource protection district. We have an ordinance, and we also have that overlay map that is part of the city's ordinance. So this is proposed as an overlay district. It is not a new on-the-ground zoning district. For example, we have general residence A, general residence B, central business, general business, planned highway business. So I'm not proposing a new zoning classification or a new category, just merely an overlay district. And the overlay district would be squarely on the central, so we have 2 sub-districts. One would be the central business zone. The second is the transit-oriented development zone. And the reason why we did that is, before I go on with the rest of the highlights, is this was another optic that the council raised, and at least I sensed back in April, was concern about this high-density zoning tool and the impact that it would have on a lot of the neighboring neighborhoods, the general residence or the senior general residential zoning districts, or in senior single resident zoning districts. So with the consultant and my staff, we were able to, and I'm glad we were able to, and I'm thrilled that we were able to, compress all the development that would be required for us under this ordinance, under the TOD and the central business, so it doesn't interfere or overlay on any of the abutting neighborhoods that would be zoned, for example, single residence or general residence. By pinpointing the ordinance in the central business zoning district as one of the sub-districts, and pinpointing it on the TOD zoning district as one of the sub-districts, I submit to the council and to the planning board that over the course of the last 4 consecutive administrations, have worked hard to improve our downtown, pursue a vision for the TOD, and to encourage a concentration of housing in those 2 zoning districts. So we adhere to that postulate. I believe that the proposed ordinance, and where we're targeting for the CB and TOD zoning ordinance, is consistent with the Downtown Urban Renewal Plan that was approved in 2007. It promotes walkability and less reliance on the automobile. It promotes the use of public transit. It helps concentrate development in areas with existing infrastructure and not in those parts of the city that are still green with forests. And as importantly, again, I want to emphasize that it offers merely, and I'm going to use the word merely, an alternative zoning tool for development. It does not replace any tools, and it does not supersede any tools. It is just merely another zoning tool that we would be adding to the zoning ordinance. Some of the additional highlights: it provides for affordable housing. It allows for residential and mixed-use development. It provides for parking flexibility. And another question that was raised back in April is, well, let me first say that the permitting authority would be the planning board. And the question was, well, what does this do with other permitting obligations? And I said that they would still apply, but the planning board, as part of its review, would do all the permitting except for anything that has to come before the Conservation Commission. So Concom would still continue to be the permit granting authority for any applications. For example, an application that's filed for a notice of intent, an application for stormwater, that would still go because that's regulated by the Conservation Commission. But all the other regulatory processes, for example, if you're going to do work in a floodplain, if you're going to do work, require earth removal operation, those typically have zoning board, but as part of this permitting process, the planning board would oversee all those permitting processes. So it's sort of like a comprehensive permit, if you may. Again, one of those benefits to a developer that if he or she opts to go with this, it just provides for a more streamlined permitting process. So the last thing I want to close with is, Judy mentioned December 31st. I wanted to appear before the municipal council as early as possible. Tonight was the earliest, and I appreciate the latitude that you afforded me to, and the planning board, to appear before you tonight. We need to get this ordinance adopted on or before the 31st of December. That's part of the law. And as I read through, extrapolated forward with your meeting schedule, the last meeting that you would have in this calendar year is December 17th. So I wanted to get this to you earlier so that you have time to chew on it, contemplate it, ask questions. I figured between tonight and the next 2 months, or through the 17th of December, we would do that. It is my hope that if I have not already convinced you to adopt this ordinance, that I will convince you to adopt this ordinance. And the reason why I say by the 17th, Council President, is once the ordinance is adopted, the planning department then has to file an application with the Commonwealth and file that as well. That's going to take about a week. It's kind of a lift. So if this were to be voted, hopefully before the 17th, but if not, by the 17th, that gives staff sufficient time with the consultant to fill out the application and get that on record with the Commonwealth. So that's what I have for a presentation. Judy, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add, but again, if there are any specific questions, I'm glad to try answer those tonight. If not, I'm more than happy to return at a committee meeting to discuss those at that time.
Council Sawyer.
Hi, Gary, how you doing?
Hi, Ms. Council.
Thanks for coming and showing this to us. The zoning map, it looks like it's one area, and you had mentioned something about, the requirements are 50 acres, but then it could be 25 with other areas. I know you did mention different zoning areas, and I don't know if that was all included in this, or
Yes.
if that includes
So
something
two
else.
answers. So the first is we were able to compress it all one acreage area, so we didn't have satellite areas. The second optic is that that's all the CBD and the TOD is all on that. It's that one geographic area.
Okay, thank you.
There is one line I'm going to add to this, literally a line, is just to split off the TOD with the central business. I neglected to do that. I will amend that map to show that. Just so anyone looking at this knows where the line is between the two sub-districts.
Additional questions? Okay. Chair Benet, do you see any reason to keep this public hearing open?
I don't think so.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. I missed that, sir. I'll own it.
Am I all set?
Any other questions for Mr. Arazian or for Judy? All right, thank you, Gary.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Again, I want to just say thank you. I appreciate you allowing the latitude to appear tonight. That meant a lot to me. All right, folks.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else speak in favor, which I always ask?
I'll try to be brief because I know you have a lot of other business tonight, and I don't want to repeat everything that Gary said. For the record, Jack Jacoby, 15 Prince Street. I'm here just as a citizen, not representing a client tonight, although I do have an interest that I'll tell you about in a minute. Obviously, we have a housing shortage in the Commonwealth, especially affordable housing. This is the Commonwealth's answer to that in part. I would like to emphasize that what Gary said, which is that this is just enabling legislation. It doesn't require any units to be built anywhere. It just provides for another way to get it done. What I really, really like, well, first of all, let me just say Gary's done a great job, which should be no news to you. This is an outstanding piece of work that he's given you. But the option to have a developer, and as you know, I earn a large part of my living representing developers, so the option for a developer to use what the traditional tools that we have or this tool, I think is a positive. I think another positive is the fact that you're proposed to put this in the place where you wanted this kind of housing anyway, in the TOD, in the central business district. Part of our policy as a city for a long time has been to get more people living downtown on the theory that then businesses will follow, restaurants and bakeries and butcher shops and all the rest. And so this, to me, is very positive development for us as a city. The law certainly requires this, and Gary emphasized to you the reasons that this could have an enormous effect on us as a city if we weren't available for grants. But I also want to tell you that I've been working with the people who are trying to get the Union Theater rehabbed and reopened. And the good news is we've gotten a couple of very large grants from the state. The bad news is that the grant we just got for $419,000 has in it a requirement that we don't get the grant if the city doesn't adopt this by December 31st. And it would be a shame to me, and nobody likes this kind of stuff when the state pulls this. You know, I mean, they're telling us you must do this or else we'll take your grants away and give them to some other community. It's not really very nice, but I understand that's what they're doing. But when we're so close now that we've raised $6 of the $800,000 we need through 2 grants, and we're working on some more things, I would just hate to see us not be able to start this project next spring and get the Union Theater online by, this time next year, and help with what I think is our downtown revitalization. People are here from Illuminate, who I've been working with. By the way, it's pro bono work. I am not charging them. I'm just volunteering my time to be a part of this. And we've been working with the Friedmans who own the Union Theater, and they've been extremely helpful and cooperative. So this is a good thing, but we really do need this ordinance passed in some form or another. Gary did share the text with me, and I did a little wordsmithing and shared it with him, so there may be a few tweaks that he decides he wants to make to it, because just in my other role as an attorney, I always like to understand what the language is and make sure that we can comply with that language and what we apply for. So Gary may be doing that, but bottom line here is that the law requires it. I don't think have much choice, but this really, to me, aligns with our policy as a city to put this kind of housing downtown and to help with the housing crisis, to have a tool to have affordability. I think this is a real positive for the city, and I urge you to adopt it.
Any questions for Mr. Jacoby? Jack, thank you, and accept my humblest apology.
Excuse me?
Please accept my humblest apology for a little faux pas a few minutes ago. Do we have anyone else to speak in favor?
Good evening, councilors. Thank you for having me. For the record, my name is Christopher McDermott. I'm the Economic Development Director of the city, and my address is 17 Devon Commons Lane, Braintree, Massachusetts. So I'm here to speak in favor of the proposed amendment. I want to echo what Jack said a second ago. I think Gary has pulled together a very strong our ordinance here that really speaks to the purposes the city's seeking to achieve, and also while balancing some of the concerns. Compliance with the law is a factor determining eligibility, or at least taken into account on a number of key grants that we apply for. This year alone, we just spoke about the $419,000 underutilized properties grant that's been awarded to our friends at Illuminate for redevelopment or refurbishment of the theater at Union Street. My office and Gary's also received $50,000 for a planning study in relation to Sturdy Health, which will really help us work with our friends over at Sturdy and envisioning what that district's going to look like, and making sure that we're able to drive positive change in that area of the city that is also reliant upon compliance with this law. Aside from these two programs, a number of others that take this into account that we often tap into our community planning grants, Massachusetts Downtown Initiative, the Brownfields Redevelopment Fund, and the Commonwealth Places Program. My office has itself brought home a number of key grants in recent years that are impacted by this. Just for some examples, we have the remediation that's ongoing at 53 Falmouth Street, the launch of our downtown wayfinding effort, and also the effort to craft a vision for the city's TOD. So this would really impact our ability to tap into any of those sources in the future, not only depriving us of funding this year, but also in years to come. Last but not least, I just want to echo some of what Gary and Jack were saying, is I think it was very wise of Gary to really focus this around an area that's already been cited and primed by the city for development. I also took a look at the ordinance. It aligns fairly closely when it comes to height and density with what's already there. So I think that really continues to drive change to the area that we want to see it, while protecting from things getting out of hand. So with that, I really hope this body will vote in favor of this ordinance, and I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Do we have any questions for the speaker? Chris, thanks for coming down.
Thank you very much.
All right. Do we have anyone else to speak in favor?
Good evening, Council. My name is Michael Sherrod. I am the president of the board of directors of Illuminate Theatrical and Creative Arts Company. We are the company, the organization that has spearheaded the Union Theater Revival Project, as mentioned by Jack and Chris tonight so far. And they've already hit the highlights, right? It's a $419,000 UPP grant that we have been awarded, but it is tied to this MBTA zoning. So just dream with me for a moment. Union Theater is open. Restaurants are there. Don and Gigi's is there, Chubb's is there. There are other restaurants that are going to come in. The foot traffic from any amount of entertainment, whether it is a theater production, a movie, a vaudeville show, a comedy act, a talent show. Attleboro's got talent. I see it happening, right? But it's also community space. It be a graduation space. Any number of possibilities at the Union Theater. But those doors can't be opened if we don't get this grant. And as Jack said, we've gotten 2/3 of the way through raising the money that needs to be there to open those doors. So I urge you, as much as I can, as passionate as I can, please pass the zoning.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for the speaker? And Mike, can we just get your last name again and your address for the record?
Sherrod, Sherrod, 307 South Main Street.
Thank you very much. Do we have anyone else to speak in favor? Do we have anyone to speak in favor? Do we have anyone to speak against? Anyone to speak against? Anyone to speak neither for nor against? Anyone to speak neither for nor against? Now, Chair Benoit, do you see any reason to keep this public hearing open?
I think we're clear.
All right, thank you. I'll declare that public hearing closed as well. Thank you, Planning Board, for your hard work.
Do you want me to read them all at once, or just one at a time?
One at a time. Thank you.
Public hearing to discuss proposed amendments to Section 13-3.1 of the city ordinances. Adopt the amended classification plan pursuant to Section 13-3.1 of the revised ordinances of the city of Attleboro.
Thank you. Do we have anyone to speak in favor?
Good evening.
2 weeks in a row.
Yes, I'm glad you'll have me back. Good evening, Council President Delicio and municipal council members. I'm here to speak in favor of the proposed amendments to Chapter 13, Sections 3 and 4. But please note for the record, I take no position on the proposed changes pertaining to Section 5 and the compensation of elected officials. You will note that my comments will be somewhat general in nature, as Human Resources Director Lynn Davin and Director of Budget Administration Mason Lord will be attending the committee meeting tomorrow night to provide you with more detailed information about the classification and compensation study and the proposed plan, changes, and timeline to implement the study results. By way of background, some of you may recall that in September 2022, President Delicio and I jointly submitted new business to the council related to better understanding the city's hiring challenges and whether our classification and compensation is competitive with other municipalities. The last time a study of this sort had occurred was 2007. And since that time, as you all know, the city and the employment landscape have much changed. In February 2023, the council approved the expenditure of $45,000 for a classification and compensation study for exempt, AKA non-union employees. And although I am no human resources expert, it seems clear to me that undertaking a classification and compensation study in the public sector is no easy task and is not an exact science. Indeed, it is fair to say that many government operations do not fall within the category of an exact science, as we are subject to annual and varying revenue, budget, and economic constraints, and the unique characteristics and changing needs of our community. We're not like a business, folks. We are the government. It's a little bit different on this side, and every community varies in myriad ways. Additionally, it must be emphasized that this study was about positions and compensations. It is not and was not intended to be a performative evaluation of the employees currently serving in the positions studied. As I have said several times before this body, Attleboro is fortunate to have a cadre of talented and dedicated staff members serving the city and its residents, and the results of this study do not in any way diminish that fact. I understand that change can be difficult, particularly when changes occur after long periods of a status quo, and when change conflicts with settled expectations. Finding a balance between fairly compensating current employees and better positioning the city to attract and retain new employees in today's employment environment requires thoughtful consideration and planning. Importantly, it also requires consideration of the taxpayers and our responsibility to use taxpayer funds in service to the community now and into the future. After much thought and discussion, it is my firm belief that the proposed changes to the city's classification and compensation plans for non-represented employees strikes a fair balance of these concerns and is in the best interest of the city. Of particular note, I maintain that annual 3% salary increases are not financially sustainable, and that reducing annual salary increases to 2% in effect results in more funds available for cost of living adjustments as they are needed and warranted and supported by budget funds. Adding an extraordinary performance bonus and creating a culture of creative and collaborative problem solving is also a meaningful improvement. Government hasn't been always known for its creativity and collaboration. That is something we strive and need to do better moving forward. Lastly, I assert that revising the classification plan based on the nature of the job duties is an improvement of the current system, which is just a hierarchical structure, and that replacing the current wage step compensation table with salary ranges will better allow for flexibility in hiring new employees in the future. Additionally, there is good reason to believe that attracting younger employees and starting salaries, strike that. Additionally, there is good reason to believe that attracting younger employees will become increasingly challenging in the public sector, and increased flexibility in starting salaries is one way we can improve our profile for prospective young professionals. In the longer term, adopting new technologies and prioritizing professional development and training will also be important to maintaining our competitive edge. For all these reasons, I fully believe that the proposed plan is in the best interest of the city and its taxpayers, and I respectfully ask that you adopt the necessary amendments to implement the plan. This would also be a very productive first step towards more regular assessments of our classification and compensation plans, of our hiring and retention strategies, of our professional development and training, in meaningful job performance evaluation. In today's employment marketplace, folks, we simply cannot afford to wait another 20-plus years without revisiting these important issues. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for Mayor DeSimone? No questions. So, Mayor,
Yes, sir.
quick question. You talked a little bit about the performance piece of this. Never seen, it is creative, but how does that work? Can you walk us through kind of what that performance bonus, can't remember how it was phrased.
The bonus or what would be like an annual?
Well, kind of both would be
okay.
helpful, but more the bonus, because
Sure.
You know,
Jay,
just
if I
curious
may,
about
President
how that-
Delicio.
Yeah.
You work in the public sector.
Well,
right?
that's where this question is.
I've been working in the public sector for a while too, and we don't usually give like performance-type bonuses, right? So one of the things that was suggested is that this is a good way to give people an added incentive to be creative, collaborative, to be forward-thinking, and all of that stuff. But also, for folks who may be at the top of the pay scale, this is an opportunity, right, to get a little bump in their salary for extraordinary performance in their job. And I have no doubt that a lot of the department heads and other non-represented professionals will get this bonus in the very near future. You know what I mean? So it's kind of an incentive and motivation for folks at the top, but also to acknowledge any employee who comes forward. It is my experience that it's in the city's best interest to become more creative and collaborative and problem solving, right? We just can't throw monies at problems. We got to think. We got to think, and we got to think in new and different ways, and that's not necessarily what government is known for.
So can you walk us through what the parameters of that bonus is? Is it,
Yeah.
is it going to be spelled out? Is it
Yeah.
going to be just kind of?
Yes, thank you for that. I don't have the ordinance before me, but, and that would follow. But ordinarily, you could receive it once a year. You couldn't receive it more than once a year, but there would be some guidelines about it. But to be honest with you, some of the details that need to be worked out. But I have no doubt that we can, that will be the easy part, President Delicio, if we get the rest of this done.
Sure. Councilor Angel.
Thank you, President Delicio. Thanks, Mayor DeSimone, for coming down. I really appreciate it. As I've said before, this is my world, so all this makes sense to me.
Yeah.
But I do understand it's change for people that have not in the business, private sector and stuff. I was going to ask you this tomorrow, but I figured I can at least ask it now. And if you don't have it, you can find out for me tomorrow or whatever. But there is some employees that, with the new plan, that might not be at the top of their range now, but with the new study, they're at the top of the range. So, like, I know you just touched on bonuses. That's one way to take care of it. Let's say in my world, people get poached, they get taken from another opportunity and stuff. Is there anything in there, or is there anything stopping them from, say, the city coming in and saying, okay, this person's valuable, they have institutional knowledge, we need to retain them? Is there anything that can help, or just in case that was to happen, to say offer them an incentive to stay versus leaving?
Well,
I know it's a tough question, but.
It is a tough question. So again, I want to emphasize, this was not about people. It was about positions and compensation. And I know that people are like, yeah, but it is about people. Yes, but objectively, it's not, right? So so if someone is going to be maxed out under the new plan, I think, Councilor Angela, we'd have to, there is no mechanism. We'd have to come down before you, before the council. I think it would probably warrant an evaluation of the job description. Is what they're doing comprehended in the description as it currently exists? If they're performing duties that are outside that job description, an update to job description will likely be warranted, perhaps a reclassification of the position that could justify an increase in pay. But it wouldn't just be necessarily to retain people. You know what I mean? It would have to be, what is it about what they're doing that may warrant an increase in their current salary? Are there duties that we didn't, that have been added over the years or over time? So, and as I've said to other people, if we adopt this moving forward, there will be adjustments, right? This is not in any way fixed, right? We're going to have some growing pains, some adjustments. And in fact, some of our job descriptions will need an update as people transition in and out of these positions. They're going to need to be rewritten and updated. And I think what we want to do moving forward is have ongoing and regular conversations about the job descriptions. Is someone doing what the job description says? What duties have fallen out over time? What duties have been added over time? And then once you get the job description correct, what is the appropriate compensation for that position? So I say all that to say, sir, it's a work in progress, but it would entail some kind of process.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Council Reynolds and Council Holmes.
Thank you.
I believe there was something in here, and correct me if I'm wrong, about every 3 years or 5 years it being looked at again as far as salaries.
That was the elected provision. I can't remember, Council Reynolds, but I can't, I don't have the ordinance in front of me. I left it back there. But I do think as a matter of practice, yes, it's not only in the human resources and the city's best interest, I would suggest it's in the council's best interest too that we all do this, so we don't wait 20 plus years. And if it's not in there, because I can't remember if it's in the elected official ordinance or not, but if it's not, we can certainly write into the class and comp table ordinances that they must be, technically you adopt them every year for the record, but we could certainly add in, if it's not in there, a requirement that we review. Is it in the elected officials? Yeah, okay. So the provision you're mentioning, Council Reynolds, is in the elected officials, which I don't want to discuss. But we could certainly, and that's a good idea, write in something similar so we don't do this again.
Sure, that'd be great. Thank you.
That makes sense.
Council Holmes and Vice President Dolan.
Thank you. I just have two questions.
Yeah.
In the past, I think that stipends were often used for this, so I wanted to know how that was kind of being addressed. And then my second question, so I'll just ask both of them right now. Are your thoughts that we would potentially adopt some of this and then have it on have a timeline, like potentially 6 months and then a year? Or do you see this as being something that would be kind of all-encompassing, I guess?
So first of all, stipends, right? Stipends are not how we want to do business moving forward, right? Stipends are kind of a Band-Aid measure. If you add a duty to somebody, you give them a stipend. I think ideally, if you have a duty that requires performance, you need to figure out where that duty best lives. And if you're assigning it to somebody and adding it to the job responsibilities, the correct thing to do is to increase their salary as needed. Stipend is not how we want it. That's not how we want to operate. And I remember I think some of us expressed concerns about it in the past. So Council Holmes, moving forward, that's not a practice that I'm going to recommend the city continue. That we have to seriously evaluate. And do we actually need maybe a new person for those duties instead of slapping them over there or on this other person? And then to your question, the way the plan was presented by HR Director Davin is that it would be implemented over time, that some people would be phased in so they would get their step increase in the current or upcoming year, and it would be phased in. So it's not like January 1st, everything happens. People kind of roll into it. And I think Mason provided a really good chart on page 2 of the memo that kind of describes that process.
Okay. Thank you.
But again, if I may, and thank you for the question, it's not just about the plan, right? It's a culture. It's a culture of a work environment that we want to create at the same time of meaningful performance evaluation and encouraging and rewarding people for the behaviors we don't often support in the public sector. So I guess I say all that say it's a process.
Thank you.
Vice President Dolan.
Thanks. So people that are at the top are still eligible for COLAs?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Vice President Dolan. Yeah, COLAs and increases are two separate things, right? An annual increase, or what's referred to as a periodic increase in the ordinance, is basically like your annual review, right? A COLA is dependent on two factors, the current economic environment and the availability of budget funds. Those two things are completely separate. So you could get a periodic increase of the year, but no COLA, right? Or you could get both. And that is always the case. That is not changing. COLAs are not going away. This has no impact on COLAs at all, except the one upside that may be, one of the upsides, is if we reduce the annual increase to 2%, that's in effect more money in the kitty, if you will, for COLAs. So, yeah, but they're not in any way going away. We're not trying to get rid of them. That's not all what you want to do, because what COLAs do fundamentally, if we want to be competitive, you need to do COLAs, because the economic environment is telling you you need to pay people more for that job. So that's what a COLA effectively is an increase based upon the economic environment. And that position and the services that it provides are more valuable, and a COLA is made because the COLA stays with the position. A step increase or a wage increase just goes with the person. All right, so thank you for allowing me to draw that distinction, because I know it took me a little while to wrap my brain around that too, but it's meaningful. And if you haven't had the opportunity in your work life to deal with this stuff, I understand it might be a little confusing. So thank you for that.
Additional questions? Mayor, before you leave, so thank you. And I think, I appreciate what you said about it's not, you have to look down the road. It's not just the people right now, it's the position. The concern I have, and if, through you to Lynn, if she could come tomorrow prepared to really talk about what's the impact it is going to have on those who are at the top of their pay scale.
Yeah.
How do we build something into this that takes care of them? Because, that institutional knowledge, that decades and decades of hard work that they've given to the city, just want to ensure that, because it would be, and certainly hyperbolic, but hate to see a mass exodus
Of course, yeah, agreed.
these folks, because that institutional knowledge you only replace by experience.
May I provide a somewhat cursory answer? And Lynn may say, okay.
Sure.
So right now, President Delicio, as you know, if you're at the top, you're at the top. If nothing changes, people at the top don't get anything, right? They're eligible for COLAs every year like every other employee. So in that regard, nothing changes. So if you're maxed out currently and you roll into the new plan and you're maxed out, yes, that situation still applies. I would remind you, number one, that's the situation now if you do nothing. And I would remind you, number two, that the salary survey indicated that based upon the study, what is the fair pay range for the duties described in the job description and the interviews given by the employees and the comparative analysis, that pay is fair. And some people are actually above the new salary, the proposed new salary range. So, yeah.
Just think it's an important discussion point.
I agree. I would argue, though, again, like the study showed that most people at the top are competitive, and that in the current, there's nothing we can do for them now.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Additional questions? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for your consideration.
Do we have anyone to speak in favor? Anyone else to speak in favor? Do we have anyone to speak against? Anyone to speak against? Anyone to speak neither for nor against? Anyone to speak neither for nor against? Councilor Angelo, do you, I would entertain and think about closing this, but I would just like to ask that, we keep the discussion going. I think these are really robust. I know you've done a lot of work thus far, but we'll close the meeting, but I'd like to ensure that we keep the conversation going in committee.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do you see any reason to keep this public hearing open? No, sir. Thank you. I declare this public hearing closed, and I would ask our assistant clerk to read the notice of the third public hearing.
Public hearing to discuss proposed amendments to section 13-4.1 of the city ordinances. Adopt the amended compensation plan pursuant to section 13-4.1 of the revised ordinances of the city of Attleboro.
All of my comments apply.
Sure. We'll note the record to that. Thank you. Do we have anyone to speak in favor? Do we have anyone to speak against? Do we have anyone to speak neither for nor against? Councilor Angelo, do you see any reason to keep that public hearing open?
No, President Delicio.
Okay, thank you. I declare that public hearing closed as well. And Assistant Clerk, I would ask you to read the fourth and final public hearing of the evening.
Public hearing to discuss a proposed amendment to section 13-5 of the city ordinances. Adopt the new compensation plan for the publicly elected officials pursuant to section 13-5 of the revised ordinances of the city of Attleboro.
Thank you. Do we have anyone to speak in favor? Do we have anyone to speak against? Do we have anyone to speak neither for nor against? Councilor Angelo, do you see any reason to keep this public hearing open?
No, President Delacio, do not.
All right, thank you. And do you want to talk, I declare that public hearing closed. Do you want to talk about the special meeting tomorrow evening?
Yes, sir. So tomorrow at 6 o'clock at Attleboro High School, there will be the meeting on the compensation plan. And we will have guest speakers. It'll be Mayor DeSimone. It'll be Lynn Davin in personnel, and it'll be Mason Lord. And hopefully the council, sorry.
What room?
It's
Princess Zita.
Yeah, it's the
Princess
Frankie-
Zito, correct. Good job. Princess
It's where the
Zito
school
room.
committee meets.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, thank you, Councilor Angelo.
Thank you, President Delacio.
We're operating under suspended rules. The reason for this hearing tonight was only for public hearings. There will be no mayor's communication, no clerk's communication, no committee of the whole, no committee reports, no old business, no new business. Before we adjourn, I just want to take a second and thank the Elections Committee, the Elections Department, all their volunteers for the great work they've been doing with the early voting, which continues through Friday at noon, November 1st, Friday at noon. For those who haven't done it, I took my son to vote for the first time this Saturday. We were in and out within 10 minutes, and it was a really smooth and easy process. So thank you to all those involved. That being said, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned at 7:25.